We have to. No, we're not going to sing.
All right, we are live, gentlemen. All right, welcome everybody to the live coding happy hour for September 30th, 2016. And so we've got the band is put back together. We've got Chuck Tomasi here. We've got Josh Nerius here. I'm Dave Slusher. We are all here. We are going to basically catch up. We're going to start right where the last one left off. So Josh is going to do some more work with OAuth. Trying to integrate Bitly into his ServiceNow instance using OAuth. But before then, Chuck is already rolling. What are we all drinking?
I've got an Oscar Blues Dale's Pale Ale.
I've got a Terrapin Liquid Bliss Chocolate Peanut Butter Stout.
Oh my goodness.
That sounds delicious.
It's like drinking a Reese's cup.
Oh, yeah, I got to try that. I have a Two Brothers Adam Smasher Oak Aged Oktoberfest, another Chicago local, and it just occurred to me that it's called Adam Smasher because it's right across the street from Fermilab.
Fermilab,
the brewery is.
Yeah. Oh, what a great idea!
So, yeah, I don't know if it's a healthy thing to drink beer that's brewed right next to a laboratory like that, but
what's the worst that can happen? Superpowers?
That's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm gunning for.
You'll drive your collider right into other particles.
All right. So, Josh, if you want to start sharing, and let's get right to it, because let us disclaim, give it the disclaimer up top, which is, as we saw last week, if you watched last week, and you go to, I'll put the link to last week in here as well while we go. We saw OAuth was extremely fiddly, just trying to get it. I mean, that's basically what we did last week, was like watching you kind of debug, getting the headers and figure out where the responses are and how like what you were getting back. The expectation that you had was not quite the same as what was returned by Bitly's OAuth implementation. So now we're taking that forward and trying to make that real. And it may or may not work. So we're going to do the best we can in an hour and move that ball down the field as far as we can. Is that fair
absolutely.
to say? Okay.
Absolutely fair to say. And if things do go okay, we have some other content lined up as well. So I'm going to actually dig into some other APIs, specifically Google's Analytics API for YouTube, to see how it handles OAuth, because it gets us into some categories that we didn't really get into with the Bitly API, because the Bitly implementation of OAuth is actually very simplistic. And you'll probably run into some things that are a little bit more complex than that. Before I start sharing a couple of notes, so last week we came to a few conclusions about the Bitly OAuth implementation, namely that the token was expiring after 30 minutes. And actually, I went back and I spent some more time in the documentation since last week, and I discovered that Bitly tokens don't expire. So that actually brings up an interesting point, which is when a token doesn't expire and the API comes back and does not specify, hey, I expire in this amount of time, we have to do a little extra work in that script include that we built last week to basically to tell the system this is not going to die. It's not going to expire. And if we don't do that, at some point, 30 minutes after we get the token, is going to go away, even though the token is actually still fine. So that's something that we're going to talk about. The other thing is, because it doesn't expire, there are no refresh tokens. So we talked about refresh tokens a little bit. We can't actually demonstrate that with Bitly because since it doesn't expire, there's no reason to refresh it. Therefore, we don't get a refresh token. So that's something else that we'll potentially get into in a little bit. But all of that preamble aside, I'm going to go ahead and share.
Right. Yeah, you should be presenting to everybody.
Perfect.
I'll be video engineer's best friend. Make sure you lock the screen and get rid of the avatars, Dave.
Alrighty. So just as a quick reminder of where we were, I'm going to pull up the artifact manager. And I will pull up an artifact, and theoretically, if I put something into this published URL field and I save it, and if things haven't broken since last week, in a few moments, we should see something come through. And actually, it's not going to work. And I just realized why. And it's because, true to my word, I revoked the access tokens after broadcasting them all over YouTube last week. So it's actually very important. So let's go and let's get things working again. And this will serve as a quick refresher for anyone.
I had to do the same thing for a customer demo this week. They said, can we record this? And I realized I was putting my two-factor authentication key on the screen and went, oh, Got to generate a new token.
Yes. Always remember to do that. And if you don't, you will get hacked. It will happen. I don't know if you've ever run across things out in like tokens in GitHub repos and things like that. It's not a good thing. So
yeah, that's what it was. It was a GitHub token.
So we're going to go into our bit.ly shorten thing. And you know what? Before I even proceed, because it probably drove people crazy last week, certainly drove me crazy, I'm making a bookmark to this right now. I keep going back to that constantly. Let's just get bookmarks are awesome. And they changed a little bit, but they're still there and they're still great. So we're going to get an OAuth token. I'm going to allow this. And this time, see, it worked. Nothing, no sorts of pain getting it to work the first time around. And for a very brief moment, we're going to ignore the fact that this expires in 30 minutes because we just want to see what happens here. So now.
And Josh, you might want to zoom the screen a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Command plus, man.
Bit,
Us old guys.
Visible.
Yeah. How's that?
That's better.
Cool. So let's go in here. Let's change this a bit. Let's make that a lot shorter. And let's save it. And there's a good chance that everything is just completely broken now. But it's not. Actually, it worked. So we see that it did what it did last week. It took our URL that we generated, it threw it into the abstract field. Notice I did create a short URL field since last week, so we have a good place to put that now. But we've at least verified that this is working. The problem, though, is that if we go and we look at that REST message, we've hard-coded it. So what we want to do is we want to find a way to basically how can we go out there and find this thing. I spent some time looking through a series of server-side. So if we go out to, let's just go to docs.servicenow.com. I'm sorry, developer.servicenow.com for just a brief moment. And if we go to API server and we look at loading, might be my internet connection. It's spending lots of time sharing my voice instead of actually loading stuff. And you'll see there's a series of Glide OAuth client APIs out there. And so I spent some time working with these APIs, trying to actually do something like go and get a token. But I couldn't actually get this to work with what I was doing because these are really focused on server-to-server communications where you're not dealing with some sort of interactive auth flow where the user, like I did a minute ago, I clicked I authorize this. This is something where you're actually doing a server-to-server flow where basically you're passing a username and a password and you're getting a token from that username and the password. So I've sort of abandoned using the OAuth client for the time being for what we're trying to do. And instead, because we know that this token is static, basically just going to create some simple Glide record queries to say, go out there and look for the token that corresponds with the current user that's tied to the current REST message that we're working with. So that's the goal. That's the goal for the first part of this, is to see, can we go and get that token? And so first, I guess what I'll do is I'm going to go into the REST message itself. I just want to look at this REST message. And we know that this REST message is tied to this auth profile. Actually, more specifically, we know that this REST method is tied to this auth profile. And so what we probably need to do here is find out how can we, using this REST message and method, kind of walk backwards till we get to the correct values to determine which token actually belongs to this particular request. So that's what I'm going to do. So first off, I'm going to use Explore because I don't know if you've seen Explore before. It's actually very cool, and it's a great utility. James Neal and the SN Developers guys put this out. It's kind of a REPL for working in ServiceNow, and it's a little bit more capable than scripts background. So if you're curious about what that is, that's what I'm working in.
It's available on the Share portal.
Yes, it's available in Share, and actually they just released a new version today, which is pretty cool. And what I'm going to look at is the OAuth credential table. And this is where, when we actually got that token, all of those tokens go into the OAuth credential table. And just to see what we get, I'm going to run this. And what do we get? We get looks like I got to do geo.next. What do we have out there? I think we only have the one token for this, so we can actually explore to see what's in this token. So you'll see that we've got things like the expires date, so we could potentially use that in our code if we wanted to. We have the requester profile, which is a reference to the OAuth requester profile, and that's what actually is going to tie it back to that particular REST request. We have the token itself somewhere in here. You see token? Yeah, there's token. So there's the token. That's actually what we want to send with the request. And then we have the user. So the user is the current user that's logged in. So in theory, what we want to say is, let's say gr.add query, and we want user. And if we run that again, let's just make sure it still comes back, and it does. And so now we just need to figure out, how do we want to do this? Let's look at this OAuth entity. That's not very pretty. Let's do this. Let's go into the OAuth credential table. I just want to explore. There's two out there. Interesting. So what we want to do is we want to say, how can we figure out how to tie this back to the REST message? So let's open it. There's the requester profile. Let's open that. There's the entity profile. Let's open that. As you see, there are a few steps that this kind of walks backwards.
Relational databases are a wonderful thing.
They are, and so it's kind of helpful to explore. So what do we want to look at? What we want to look at is the OAuth profile here. So we're in the actual method. Let's get the sysid of this profile and see if we can find out what it's actually linked to. There it is. There's the sysid. That's the default profile. And if we come out here, let's go to the OAuth entity profile .do. Sysid equals, yep, there it is. So sure enough, basically what we're looking for here is we can go out there on the REST method and say, go find the entity profile with that sysid. So that gets us one step of the way. We need to get a little bit further. So let's, you know what? Let's do this. Let us say that this method, just for now, is, no, that's not going to work either. So do you guys kind of see what I'm trying to get at here? This is a little bit weird. So in Chuck, just to kind of bring you up to speed on this, because you weren't on last week, part of the problem is with Bitly, they want that token to be sent as a URL parameter called access token instead of a header. And so what ServiceNow OAuth does is it goes out there and it says, because we've tied this REST message to this OAuth profile, we are going to use this OAuth profile to determine what the token is and then send that token as a header. But we don't want it as a header. We want it as a URL parameter. So, basically that's what we're after here is at the time that we're actually constructing this REST message, we need to now go out and say, we have to go out there and actually dynamically figure out which token we want instead of being able to just let the system handle it. So,
and this kind of Josh, this kind of gets to what you were talking about last week, where although there is a standard for some of the stuff, like I guess the specification is that you have to pass it in, but there's no specification of how you pass it in. And that's kind of the root of the problem, is that Bitly is kind of often an island doing things different than everybody else, or different than the default expectation of ServiceNow.
Yeah, and that appears to be the case. And so, yeah, so we basically have to, we're kind of left figuring out, okay, now how can we actually do this? Now, theoretically, I mean, we could do something very naive and say, let's specify the specific credential record, and let's go look that up every time. But if that ever changes, then we have to change this every time, and that's no good.
Right.
So, so I think one of the things that we can do, and I'm just going to pull up the documentation for REST message v2, is we need to get a reference back to the REST message so that we can then sort of walk through the REST message and determine how is it configured and what's the OAuth profile that it's tied to. So, because we've got this thing called R, and theoretically, somewhere in this thing called R is a reference to the actual OAuth profile.
So you're kind of reverse engineering this so that you know what to dot walk.
Yep, that's exactly it. And in true live coding happy hour fashion, I don't know where that thing is. So, but that's the point, right?
That's why we're here, gentlemen. This is how you do the job.
Exactly. So I guess, I mean, this is the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to our developer portal and see, you know, what are the things that we can get. So can we get things about this? Where is it?
What were you looking for again?
We're looking to see what the profile is that's associated with a REST message.
There's a set requester profile, but I don't see a get requester profile.
Yeah, I see that. Interesting. Let me just look for profile anywhere on here. Yeah, so set authentication profile, and what is that doing? That is going out there, and it is doing. Yeah, it's actually setting this up so that we know what the authentication profile is. Which I guess one thing we could think about is using basically not trying to work our way through the REST message, but instead having a configuration setting that is what is the OAuth profile that we want to use. So this would theoretically be a system property in our thing. Yep. So we're setting that proactively no matter what. We're not gonna let the system sort of decide that, and then that gives us the reference that we need to go and hopefully find what we're looking for. So I think I like that better. So what is this asking for? This wants OAuth 2. It wants the sysid.
Their sysid in the example isn't quoted.
I see that. That's not good. Let me submit the feedback. No, I'm not going to do that right now. So what we want, so we've got a profile here, and this is the profile. So what we should be able to do is say that indentation is a little bit off. There we go.
We need some formatting in this thing.
Yes. And what is it? It is set authentication profile. All right.
OAuth 2.
All right. So theoretically, that's going to set it. Now, all we need to do is to figure out how to dot walk backwards, because theoretically we should be able to construct a query. So taking like this OAuth credential query here, and we should be able to construct a query that says, give me things where, I'm just going to leave that commented out for now, gr.add query, and now we just need to figure out what the field is. So let's go back here. And there's the OAuth requester profile. So it's going to be OAuth requester profile dot. Let me just put that in there before I forget. And then we've got the entity profile. OAuth entity profile.
Making this easy for you.
From the entity profile, we've got the provider. Well, hang on a second. Let's see if that's it. Yeah, that's it. That's what we want.
Yep, yep.
So
OAuth entity value, but that's okay.
Yeah. Entity. There we go. So in theory, so let's do this. Let's reverse what's getting commented out here, and let's try running it. So we've got a profile ID. Move that over there. Auth requester profile, .auth entity profile, .auth entity. And if you can say that 10 times fast, you deserve to have a drink. Let's run it. And what did we get here? Doesn't look so great.
No.
Let me do this.
There you go. Else, oops.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're getting a frowny face, so we're not finding it. So what are we not finding? Man, that is just ugly. So
that's a
wait
query.
A second. That sysid is for, isn't that sysid for OAuth requester profile?
You know what? Yeah, you're right. We're going one step too far, I think.
Sysid at the wrong level.
Yeah.
You sure?
So yep, that's exactly what it is. So basically what I'm doing is I need to not have the entity, I just want the profile. There we go.
Nope. Oh, found it. Yep.
Found it. And if I do this, because Explorer lets you do that, it doesn't let me do that right there. Oh well.
Wrong half. You're in the bad side.
Oh, yeah, you're right. This is why we have 3 people on the phone, folks. See, I would have stared at that.
Things that'll stop you for 2 hours.
It totally is. And then you're under pressure and you're like, well, what's going on?
Right.
And it was so simple.
So before you were actually dot walking to you were actually doing one more to get the thing you wanted, as opposed to.
Yeah, I was dot walking too far up the tree. So basically at this point, we've got our profile ID. And this is what we would put in a system property to say, this is the OAuth profile that we want to use. And now what we're successfully doing is we're actually querying it. So what we could do is we could turn this into a function. It's something like get token, and then profile user. And we'll just throw all this in there. I'm going to actually incorporate this into that business rule in a minute if all works. There's the tab button. So we're going to pass in the profile. We're going to
user parameterized.
Yep. User. And then we're going to just do the same thing. So get token, profile ID.
Yep.
And get token is not a function. So
I see one.
Might be something a little bit interesting with sort of the REPL nature of this. Yeah, there we go. So
okay.
Yeah.
This may be an idiosyncrasy of Explorer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So
that's the only time I've ever seen that come up in recent memory, anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's just token that we want to return. And what do we get here? Var token equals get token. And there we go. We got our token.
Yay.
So cool. So now all we have to do, and this shouldn't be going so quickly and easily, is we'll go into our business rule. Let me just open Studio to make this a little easier.
Yay, Studio.
I love Studio.
That's the first time I've seen somebody use that search on their apps because they have so many apps.
I create so many apps, it's not funny.
I just torch the instance and bring back the ones I want. I know everything's out there in a repo somewhere.
Yeah. So what we can do is we are currently... Oh, yeah. So I see what we need to do. So we need to do 2 things. We need to, first off, at the beginning, we're going to get our token. So let me just define a method down here that we just built. And ideally, we would put this into a script include somewhere, but that's level 3 of our optimization of the application. So we'll say var token equals get token. We're going to do the bad thing, and we're going to copy the sysID in there.
Do I also see another bad thing, a current.update?
Oh, you most certainly do. However, it's an async business rule, and we are updating a field that's not changing.
Okay.
So basically, our condition is if the publish URL changes, we want to go and we want to update a specific value. And unfortunately, and so this is I'm curious for your thoughts on this one, Chuck, because especially with your background in this particular topic, because we're limited in what kinds of things we can do in a scoped app from an integration standpoint. So we're doing a REST message, and in order to do a REST message, we have to do this asynchronously. And then when we get the response back, we want to take that response and send it back to our original record, which is where the update comes from.
And the other thing here is, so current.update, not a best practice. However, we are limited on the condition to only when published URL changes, and we're not changing published URL in here.
Right. Yeah. So that would be the
set
key.
Workflow false in there though.
There is no set workflow false, but and part of the challenge would be if we were ever potentially firing, basically if we were changing the value that the condition was on, then we would have a big problem.
Right. But I mean, current.update is going to fire your business rules again, all the befores and afters, anything that matches the condition.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So
to include that, I would throw a set workflow false.
That's fair. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. And for anybody that's not familiar with this, what we're doing is we're turning off business rules. And so we're saying, and workflow, yeah. And so what we're saying is that we don't want to run those other things because all we're doing is we're updating this one field. We don't want any other logic to run. If we did want logic to run when this field changes, then this might not be a good idea. But we know that all we're doing is we're setting that short URL.
We're in charge. We think we know what we're doing.
Exactly. So that's done. Now, one thing I did here is I went and I added another string parameter called access token, but I have to fix the REST message to make that work. So I'm going to go into the REST message and fix that next.
And this is the thing we talked about before, where it needs to be the parameter.
Exactly. So yeah, so right now the access token is just hard coded, and we're just going to change this. Okay. Access token.
Save.
And now let's try this again. And because I changed my code a little bit, instead of setting it in the abstract, we should be updating our short URL here. If everything worked. There it is.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now click that and
boom.
Oh my goodness. Is that the full Megillah?
It worked.
Yeah, equals false. I like that.
We got to figure out what else to do for the extra half hour. we budgeted a lot more time.
Well, you were going to get into the next step because Bitly doesn't expire. Now we got to get some more advanced tokens because this was a stepping stone use case.
Yeah, so Bitly, again, just sort of summarizing, Bitly is an example of an API that implemented OAuth, probably because people wanted to use OAuth, but they didn't really feel the need to go to lots of levels of complexity, and whereas some other APIs might need to be a little bit more robust. So the next one that I was going to show, let me just get the URL to the documentation, is doing a setup with the Google Data API for YouTube. And the reason I wanted to do this one is because this gets into some other concepts around not just access tokens, but these things called scopes. And so what a scope in OAuth is essentially, it's telling the API that you're requesting access on the user's behalf for a particular function. Think of it as a role in ServiceNow. So a role in ServiceNow is going to say you have access to do this or that. A scope is very much the same, and you've probably seen this happen before, where maybe you signed in with Facebook somewhere, and it said, this app wants to view your email address, or it says this app wants to view your email address and post as you, even when you're not there, and post comments on, basically it controls how much stuff you're granting access to on your behalf.
Okay.
And so in the case of Bitly, we didn't have any scopes. We basically just said, hey, this gives us a token. This token gives us access to everything. And it's basically a simple key to the castle. We've got everything we could possibly want. But on this side, we're going to deal with some scopes. So the first thing I'm going to do, and we didn't do this last week, but I'm actually going to set this up outside of ServiceNow using an API tool, just again for a sanity check so that we know that this thing is working. And to do that, let me just get a couple of things ready here. I first need to grab a URL. So the URL that we're going to hit is this Google APIs. We're going to Analytics V1 Reports. And in theory, we should be able to start pulling information back about YouTube videos, like how many times were they viewed, and how long did people view them, and what were the likes. And the theory for, just to kind of bring this back to the app that we're building, the theory for Artifact Manager is as we publish videos, it could be useful for us to pull this information into the system. So if we try to send an unauthenticated request, as we would expect, we get an unauthorized. If we look at the raw response, it says, ooh, yeah, login required. We need stuff. So
shame on you.
yeah. And if data did come back, I'd be very concerned. Now, in this case, I'm using an app called Paw, but Postman's another one that does very similar functionality to what we're doing. And I'm going to plug these values in just to see if we can get some kind of response back before we go and start plugging these into the ServiceNow instance. Again, highly recommend that all of you do the same, because otherwise you'll go crazy. And so we're just plugging in. There's and I went digging through Google's documentation to find these values earlier, so you wouldn't have to see me doing that. Let's see, a redirect URL I've already configured as well.
And the almighty scope.
Yes. OAuth redirect.do. And then for the scope, we're just going to set a single scope right now, although we can ask for multiple scopes at once, but we're just going to see what it looks like with a single scope. And now we're going to see what happens. So when I click Get Access Token, this is simulating the same flow that you're going to see in ServiceNow. And so in this case, here's the one scope that we asked for. Now to prove that this is actually happening, let me do this. I'm going to add a second scope to that. Let me just say YouTube. There we go. And the way Google specifies this is you can specify multiple scopes separated by a space. So we've done that. It's a little interesting. And now I'll click Get Access Token again. And now you'll see it's asking for two things. It wants to manage my YouTube account. It wants to view the YouTube analytics. So this is again, this is very important and something to consider when you're setting up OAuth is when you want to determine what your app needs to do, you have to go and work through the documentation to identify the scopes of what your app is going to ask for. And generally, you want to ask for the least amount of data possible. I think the great horrible example of this is when Pokemon Go came out, and it was granting access to your entire Google account. It's not good. You don't want that.
And your camera and your address book.
Yeah, exactly. Background GPS data, all of the stuff, probably. So I allowed it, and we actually got an access token back. I can click Use Access Token. And in the case of PAW, what that's doing is it's just taking that access token and it's adding it as a header. Now when I run this again, now you'll see that instead of a 401, I got a 400, which is progress. And what we're saying is that we just haven't provided enough data. So let's provide some data. Let's try to get one request working, and then let's plug this into ServiceNow. So URL parameters, and we want to pass in these things that it's asking for. So IDs. IDs is going to be channel equals. And then I need to find our YouTube channel ID. So I'm just going to go to youtube.com, copy this, put that in there. wants.
Does that have to be that string of characters, or if your channel has a proper, what do they call it, an alias or a name?
The short name? Or
can you put that in there as well?
I think from the documentation, you have to put in that channel ID, and there's actually an advanced settings page in YouTube that lets you specify or find what that is.
Okay, because yeah, some channels are aliased. I'm like, oh, if you have to do that, where are you going to find that? But okay, there is a place you can find it.
Yeah, there is a place you can find it. I have never tried it on a name channel.
Okay.
Well, and this is the second time I've ever tried to run this, so. And then metrics. So we want to specify the metrics that we want to bring back, and to do that, I'm just going to go to here again, and what are the metrics? Does it tell us? Come on, give me some information. Here we go. Let me pull it from another page. Bear with me one moment while I do stuff off the screen that you can't see.
I was going to say, hello, studio. Good to see you again.
You know, do I have anything from... Let me just say views. There we go. Okay, I just copied that in there. And let's try running that. Cool. So here, yeah, sure enough, we got this back. And this is giving us column and then the rows associated with that data. So we've got some information. I have no idea what this information exactly means right now. All I know is that I just got some information back. So, you know, step 3 in this whole thing is, well, what do you actually do with the response?
You throw it at Google Graph.
Yes, I pass this off to a different developer and say, I handled the OAuth, now you can handle the stuff. No, anyway. So let's go ahead and let's do the same thing we did before, and let's set this up in ServiceNow. So OAuth, application registry, and some of this is going to look familiar. Most of this is going to look familiar, but then we're going to see a couple of things that are a little bit different. So we're going to connect to a third-party OAuth provider. Hello, there we go. And we're going to say Google, YouTube, just so we can keep track of that. I'm going to copy some values from my magic second or third screen. And there we go. This is an authorization code flow, and this is one of the things that, again, is very common to accidentally mess up if you don't have the right grant type specified. The system's not going to do what it needs to do to handle the OAuth flow. There we go. In this case, this is what we happen to want. Let's get our token URL. And if we save this, we get our redirect URL automatically. So there's a redirect URL. Now, the default profile here currently has nothing in it. And I want to show you, before I add stuff to it, what would happen. So I'm going to go to REST messages, create a new REST message called Google, YouTube, Analytics. And let me go to PAW, where we already have a working request, and copy out that endpoint. Put that in there. And our authentication type will be OAuth. Our OAuth profile. We're going to search. It's Google YouTube. Save that. And the weird related lists bug is still plugging. No, it should be there. Oh, there we go. So get OAuth token. So in this case, we've got invalid requests because we haven't specified anything at all. And so we have to specify a scope for Google. So
where do you do that?
And we're going to do that by going back to where we just came from a moment ago in OAuth, and we're going to specify some things in that profile, which again, we did not have to do before. So there's Google YouTube. We're going to go into our default profile. And within here, we can insert these entity scopes. And yeah, exactly. So the entity scopes that we're going to do, let me just go back to PAW. Let's pull out one that we liked. We're just going to go with that first one. Well, I'm just going to copy the whole thing. Here we go. Now I can actually get it.
Now here I would imagine you have to list them separately, not space.
You know what? Yeah, so we are gonna list them separately here, I believe. That's going to be part of our experiment. So what I actually need to do, though, now that I'm looking at this, is I need to first define that entity scope itself. So there's two things. There's profiles.
Yeah.
And then there's scopes. And we have to define the scope first. So we're going to call this YouTube Analytics Read. So we give it a friendly name, and then we give it the systematic value that the endpoint is expecting. So we'll save that. And now that we've defined it, we can actually add it to our profile. So now we can come in here. We can say do, and there is YouTube Analytics Read. And the reason this is extremely important is because you can reuse these. You can theoretically, so say you had different applications in ServiceNow that had different requirements. You could have you could actually tie different profiles to different types of OAuth flows depending on what it is you're doing. And you can manage that by having multiple profiles, all of which leverage those scopes.
Reusable scopes, reusable profiles. Nice.
Exactly. So I'm going to go back to REST messages.
Otherwise it becomes an exercise in copy, paste on a tree structure.
Absolutely. And if you had some of the, some of these bigger APIs have dozens of APIs and potentially 100, just lots and lots of things that you could potentially interact with. And so it's definitely important. So now, there we go. Boom, we'll select the developer program. And here's an interesting thing. If you watched last week, the first time we tried it, that did not work.
But this time, it says it will expire soon. Like
it will.
In an hour.
Yes. So here's the cool thing is last week, we had to create a custom script include in order to parse the response because that response was not what ServiceNow is expecting. In Google's case, they are returning a JSON response already, which is compatible with what ServiceNow is doing out of the box. So this just worked, no extra pain involved. So, our conversation last week about, make sure that you budget time for this sort of thing. This is an example of a happy path where things are working as we want them to. So that's all good there.
Did you just tell them to tell your boss it'll take 4 times longer than you normally would think?
Overpromise? Wait, no. Underpromise.
Underpromise, overdeliver.
Yes. Overpromise, underdeliver does not sound right. Exactly. So we've got our OAuth token at this point, and it's going to expire. When is that going to expire? At 15/12/01.
And if your system is on PST, that's in an hour.
That's that's pretty soon. Now, what I want to look at is OAuth credential. And I want to see, do we have a refresh token in here? Because that was something that we didn't get to talk about before, was refresh tokens. And the answer is no, we don't. And there's actually a reason for this, and that is that Google, in order to, so Google by default says you only have interactive access. You can authorize yourself, but if that thing expires, you're going to have to, as a user, reauthorize yourself again later.
And would kind of stink if this is running in a scheduled job somewhere.
Yep, not cool at all. So we, in our case, we want this thing to be running maybe once a night. It goes out there, it pulls down our YouTube views. That would be cool. But we can't, we need to have what we're going to consider offline access. So let's go back to somewhere here. Yeah, here we go. And there is a thing called access type. And the access type is a parameter that we can pass, and we can specify online and offline. And so if we specify offline, it actually gives us more access than we had before, but we actually have to send this. Now, this is where things go a little bit off the happy path, and we have to create another script include. So we did this last week. This week, instead of for parsing the response, we have to create a script include for adding extra stuff to the OAuth request that's going out.
Is that in the header, or where are we sending that?
So this is getting sent. It should be a URL parameter, but it's a URL parameter not of the REST message itself or the REST request itself, but of the actual OAuth authorization flow. So, and that's something that we don't have direct control over in sort of the traditional REST message way. So we have to create a script include for that. So let's do this. I'm going to go into script includes. Where is my script include? Oh, that's right. It's global. We figured that out last week too. So let's switch to global. And
why did you put it in global?
We had to. So there is, in order to create an OAuth override script include today, it has to be in global, not created in a scoped app. So I think that's going to change. I think I can't guarantee that's going to change, but I think it's going to change at some point in the future.
You have more influence over that change than I do.
And so let's go ahead. We're just going to do the same thing we did last week. We're going to copy this, and we're going to say OAuth Google handler, and we'll just insert and stay. And we don't have to touch post process because that's already doing what we want it to do. But what we do want to do is, where do we want to do that? We want to add something outbound. So actually, this is where we're going to use the community, because I think this is actually in our CreatorCon session. So let's go out to the on-demand library. This is a nice way to talk about some of the resources that are out there. And in the Getting OAuth right in your web services app, we should have a thing in here that tells us how to do exactly this. And this will help us get through it a little bit faster than hacking on it by hand. So let's scroll.
This actually makes me feel good that you wrote this and you have to look it back up, because I can never remember things like this myself.
Oh, yeah.
I referenced the Tech Now video so many times, it's silly. What did I say 3 years ago?
Exactly. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so it's request param map.put. So basically it's in this request param map on preprocess. Is it preprocess off code? Now, see, I looked at it 5 seconds ago and I have to look at it again. It is preprocess off code. So in preprocess off code, we have a request param map. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but basically this is allowing us to inject things in. And in this case, instead of injecting something into how we're processing the return, we're doing it before it goes out. And if we look at, where did that go? There we go. Access type, offline. Save that.
Now, Josh, refresh my memory. So we're doing this. You're going to attach that to, which thing are you going to attach this handler to your profile?
This is going to get attached to the OAuth, the application registry record for Google YouTube. So okay. this record here, and so now we've got, if we look at everything available to us, we've got a new one. Yeah.
That's where it gets hooked.
Yep. And as a brief, it's just a quick reminder, it's got to start with the word OAuth because that is how this is getting filtered. So now that's in there. Yeah. So now it's there. We can go back to our REST message. And even though I created a bookmark to the Bitly REST message, I did not create a bookmark to the Google one. So
shame on you.
Yeah. And I just didn't do it again. Let's get a new OAuth token. We'll select that. And now we are prompted for a new thing. Now notice it didn't prompt us for the other thing because we already have the other permission. Yep. So we're gonna get that permission. This is gonna go out there. Now
if your token was expired, you would have seen both right there. Is that right?
So if the token had expired, it should have just gotten a new token. Because we've already authorized it. I think that's going to depend on.
Or let's say you had never requested it, you would have seen both.
Yes, if I'd never requested it, I would have seen both.
Okay.
And the other thing I can do is I can actually say, and this is useful to know, especially if you're experimenting with this stuff. Google Access Revoke. Let me just revoke app. There's a dashboard for this. If you go out here, say apps connected to your account. And I got to switch over to the account that I was granting it to. And so here you'll see that ServiceNow Artifact Manager has access to YouTube, manage your account, view your reports, and I could remove this. And if I remove this, then if I went back and I redid the flow, it would be as if I had never done it to begin with.
Gotcha.
So it would start from scratch. So now the cool thing is here, instead of saying your token is going to expire, we have a refresh token. It's available and it's going to expire in January. So we have some runway now. And what's going to happen is now that we have this refresh token, when the OAuth token itself goes away, we can use this refresh token on, server to server to ask for a new access token without going through this manual flow of having to, go out there and actually click on a button on a UI somewhere. So this is all server side. So this is cool. Now, why don't I have my methods for my REST message? This keeps happening to me. There we go. There's the methods. So now if I go in here and if I specify, I got to switch back to my Artifact Manager application in order to actually do this. OAuth 2.0. Google. Let's just test this. User is not authenticated. OAuth token has expired or has not been retrieved. And the reason for that is because when I did the OAuth flow a minute ago, I did it on behalf of the message, not the method. So I'm just going to get an OAuth token related to this now. There we have it. And now we can actually test it. And there we go. So even though we're getting an error, this is still a success. It's just telling us that we haven't sent the things to it.
We're communicating.
Yes, we are communicating. So at this point, I think this is a good point to start winding down. And we can talk through anything else that we want to talk through. But I don't think we have enough time to really start, coding against this JSON return and trying to do anything with it. But I guess let's pause it. Do we have any questions so far, or do you guys have any questions based on what we've talked about?
I just looked, and there's a lot of hellos from people, but I don't see anybody with a specific question. Although Isaac says he enjoys these, so thank you, Isaac.
Awesome. We enjoy these too. I enjoy doing this quite a bit. So at this point, sorry, you were starting to say
I was going to say, let me go and check the community just while so keep talking and I will double check that there's not something by the community.
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, so at this point, we've walked through again most of those common scenarios. One of the things I did not show you today was the process of actually setting up the application on the Google side. But if you're ever curious and if you ever want to play with APIs, just to say, hey, I want to set up OAuth and do some stuff, the developer dashboard or the API Explorer on the Google side is actually very useful for this. So you can go out, you can explore all the APIs that they have available and just pick one that's interesting to you and say, I want to do, and that's how I arrived at the YouTube Analytics API. And then you can click on one of the things, you can explore to say, hey, what are the things that are out there? And then you can also turn on OAuth somewhere in here. So yeah, you can set the API key, OAuth client ID, and you can go through the whole process of setting this up using OAuth.
Like our REST Explorer.
Yeah, kind of like our REST Explorer. Along with this, there's another portion of this dashboard. If I can go back. So you actually have to create or set up these APIs. So if you ever try to set this up with Google, one of the first things you have to do is you have to turn that API on. You have to generate the application name. So if we go back and if we look at the, I think I've got, this one here where we were looking at the apps connected to my account. The fact that this shows ServiceNow Artifact Manager, I had to configure that first. So I had to go out there and create an application in Google called the ServiceNow Artifact Manager before I could get those things to, talk back and forth to each other. So just something to keep in mind. But with that, we successfully, just to kind of summarize, we were able to go out there and pull data out of that OAuth credential table programmatically. So now we're not hard coding stuff with our Bitly integration. We set up a scope, and we were able to get that scope going. And we also have a refresh token. So, several steps further than we were last week. And it actually went a lot smoother today, just because Google's APIs are a little bit cleaner and they have a pretty nice implementation of OAuth. And I would suspect we've probably done some testing against them in the past.
No. So Josh, just to verify that I'm grokking this, the next level of work that you would have to do to this is you need to go into the REST message and then flesh that out so that you are filling in the proper parameters. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I got to the point now where I'm calling the API, but all of the stuff that goes along with building an integration, figuring out what endpoints do I need to call, what data do I need to pass to it, how do I process the data that's coming back? That's all TBD. That's all stuff that has yet to be done.
And so the complication there is, like, right now you don't necessarily even know since you don't necessarily have architected the other end of this, you don't even know what you're requesting. Are you going to do it every day or every month, or what?
Exactly.
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so that's kind of another exercise, and it's slightly different than what we did today. But yeah, that's a whole thing that pretty much have to work through that process of designing and then building the actual integration itself. So this is all kind of the pre-setup process because OAuth happens to be involved.
Very cool. All right, tell you what, I'm going to de-present you, and last call for questions. I don't see any more.
Let's see, and I will stop sharing. There we go.
Dave,
all right.
Mention that next week's schedule.
Oh yes, what we're going to do next week. So Josh is going to be out, but Chuck and I, and possibly a special guest, if we can scare one up, we're going to do one extremely early, and we're going to do it at 9 Eastern, 6 a.m. Now we're talking about a.m. here, 9 a.m., 6 a.m. Pacific, and the main reason we're doing this is so that it will be when people are awake in India. So we're doing a special show for our friends on the subcontinent, and also these are not necessarily the most convenient times for a lot of Europe as well. So it'll be kind of in the middle of the day for our friends to the east of us. So yeah, we're going to do that, and it's kind of we haven't decided how often we're going to do that, but we are entirely open to kind of mixing up the schedule and moving things around so that we have figured out every time is bad for somebody. So we're just kind of trying to spread out the discontent and make sure that everybody gets something sometimes. So we're trying to kind of share the love with everybody. And so it's maybe, I don't actually know culturally when people eat in Bangalore. It might be in the middle of people's dinner time, but at least they'll be awake, which is kind of better than right now.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm bummed that I won't be able to be there for that one, but I will be out of the office very happily for a little bit.
So yeah, maybe once a month or every 4 weeks or 5 weeks, or maybe more frequently. We'll see. You have a certain amount of control, which is if it's gangbusters and people in India are extremely receptive, it might be more frequently. So and we'll publicize this as best we can to make sure that kind of the people we're trying to reach know about it. So we'll work on that between now and next week. All right. Final wrap-ups. Beer
rating.
I actually untapped mine in the middle of this at one point. If you saw me looking,
You beat me to it.
Yeah, no, but we were in presenter mode, so you couldn't see me looking at my phone. But I was putting this on untapped.
So
I rate this as 4.5 on Untapped.
That's pretty good. That's pretty solid. I will have to check that out. I would say this is a solid 4, and that says a lot for an Oktoberfest. I'm very stingy with my ratings, so I'm very happy with it.
I'm going to give this a solid 4 also. Dale's Pale Ale in a can. Got a case of mix and match from Oscar Blues, and I think this is the last one to go in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, 4.0, very smooth, easy going down, doesn't not too hoppy, but still a nice full flavored beer.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you. As always, we're going to bring this in at almost exactly 1 hour, which was not necessarily the the plan. We build in some fluidity, but this has very, very quickly become my favorite way to end the work week and go into the weekend. So thank you, gentlemen, for being involved, and thank you, everybody who watched. And
You're welcome.
We will see you again much earlier next week.
All right. Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Cheers.
L'chaim.